Yes guys, you did read the title and thumbnail correctly. I am going to be ranking the easiest to hardest civs in Age of Empires 3 Definitive Edition. And by the way, this is the new patch, baby. Mexico's in here.
Jeez!
Alrighty, so starting off with our beginner civs, we have the French. Now I put French in beginner civs because they are pretty standard in terms of their units. They have lots of similarities with most of the other European civs, and I feel like they're not too complex. Probably the most complex thing about them is their courier de bois. And to be honest, they're pretty much just like a slightly tankier villager that cost a little bit more, that gather a little bit faster. And there's no really special cards that the French have over other civs, so that's why I have them as a beginner civ. I feel like they're just a good civ that you can start out with, especially if you're starting to try to get into ranked and you want to get some wins. I would definitely suggest using the French. Our next beginner civ here is the British. Now the British, I would say, are slightly more complex than the French just with their housing and mana boom. But overall, I think they're also a very, very basic civ. They have one special unit, or unique unit, which is the longbows. They're pretty much just like a skirmisher, but they cost wood, and they're very cheap. There's one card that you need, which is the Virginia Company. If you can get that with the British, then you can get a housing boom going really early. And I feel like once you get the hang of how the housing boom should go, and how you should have a British opening, then I think British are pretty simple and they're pretty easy to get good at. Okay, so now moving on to the easy civs. So our first easy civ here is Spain. Now the reason I don't have Spain as a beginner civ, because I feel like they have a lot more unique units than most other civs with their rods and lances. And I feel like to get your army composition right with Spain, it is a lot harder, and they do also have some other pretty unique cards in their deck that can be absolute game changers, but it's kind of hard to learn when and where to use those cards. Next up in easy, we have Portugal. Now Portugal are in easy because they're a very basic civ. They have Caçadores, which are literally just skirmishers but slightly different. They have organ guns, which is pretty much like a Gatling gun. Once you kind of wrap your head around the unique units, it's pretty easy. And other than that, every time they age up, they get a town hall, so I feel like they're pretty nice to like get a big boom going on early on. And I feel like they're decently easy civ. I think they're a little bit more complex just with the different units and town halls and stuff, but yeah, they're a very easy civ overall. Next up we have Germany. Now Germany is a little bit more complex than I would say Spanish and Portugal, but I still have them in easy. Every time you send in a shipment, you get some Ulans with it as well. Germany, most of their units are quality over quantity. You have to be very sparing with your troops and make sure that you're using them the correct way. Next up in easy civs, we have the Ottomans. Now, some people would say Ottomans are a beginner civ, but I would say if I started off playing Ottomans as my first civ, I'd be hella confused what's going on, because I'm getting villages for free, which is kind of confusing. You might say, oh, that's a good thing, I don't have to worry about villager production. But you have to be able to learn when to use the mosque. You have to be able to know when you should be sending in the different upgrades and choose wisely what you're going to spend with your wood. They're just a civ that takes a little bit longer to get the hang of. Alrighty, now moving on to the moderate civs. Coming up first, in the moderate civs, we do have the Dutch. Now the Dutch are a civ that definitely takes a little bit more time to learn and to master. Just because of their banks, you kind of need to learn how you're going to turtle early game and get that bank economy booming, especially if you're versing like a rush civ like Russia or a China or something. You really have to get that right balance of getting out enough units that you can defend your base and making your base easily defendable while still being able to get on top of your opponent with your bank boom to rush my... Shut up, homie! Shut up! Now, Russia is a civ that takes a little bit of time to kind of learn how you need to play them. With Russia, when I first originally started playing, I would make this huge army of musketeer and then rush at about the 10-minute mark. And I'd always be wondering, how am I losing this? I've literally just spent so long making an army. But the thing I was doing wrong is I wasn't being conservative with that army. When you're playing Russia, you just have to be able to put lots of pressure on and keep idling your opponent's villages and keep taking out villages. But you don't want to overcommit, and you have to understand that you're not going to beat your opponent with one strong push. It's going to be multiple pushes that are just like building up the pressure on your opponent, allowing your economy to overtake your opponent's economy because you're idling up their villages and stopping vill production. And also, I think Russia does have quite a few unique units with the Strelets, Cossacks, and Oprichniks. Compared to like most of the other European civs, they're probably the most unique civ, and most different, especially because all their units get trained in kind of blocks of units. Rather than being able to train like one musketeer at one time, they come in like blocks of 5, 10. But yeah, that's why Russia is a little bit harder to get the hang of, but they're definitely a really good civ. Now moving on to Sweden, one of the newer civs in Age of Empires 3 Definitive Edition. In saying that though, this game's been out for like at least a year and a half at this point. Sweden is a civ that is one of the strongest boom civs in the game, and I feel like most boom civs are a lot harder to learn than most of the like rush civs or civs that are a lot more basic. Sweden, they have so many unique cards. They are very, very different to all the other civs, and they also have a lot of unique units, and with their little houses, they can gather resources nearby. So I feel like you have to learn how to be able to balance your booming economy as well as getting the army out and just learning the cards, and I feel like they take a little longer to learn how to get good at. Now moving on to the Iroquois. Now some people will argue with my placement of Iroquois. I feel like some people think Iroquois are a lot more complex than I have them here, but Iroquois overall, I feel like they're a pretty basic civ. Obviously all of their units are unique compared to every other. Once you kind of understand how you need to be playing Iroquois, and you get some strategies built up with the Iroquois, like pretty much whenever I play Iroquois, I'm going to be rushing my opponent and putting the pressure on early. And you just have to learn how to be able to use the units and learn what the new unique units do. Now moving on to Japan. Now Japan is a civ that I feel quite comfortable playing, but when I first started playing them, I was quite confused to how they actually work, because for people that haven't played Japan before, you can't actually gather any hunts or any meat or animals. They're a whole army of vegans, man. They harvest all their resources from bushes and cherry orchards, and also understanding how their shrines work and some of the upgrades with the shrines. Okay, now moving on to, I don't know how to play this civ. You have China. Now China is a civ I've only really just started learning how to play, because they yet again have completely unique units compared to every other civ. And most of their units are just very, very different. And they're also very similar to Russia. They're a very strong rush civ, and they're very much quantity over quality. And I think you have to understand that you're not going to win fights because your units are better than them. You're going to win fights just because you have way more units. Now moving on to Aztecs. Now Aztecs is a civ that relies heavily on their community plaza and all the perks and bonuses that you get from that. And I think that's something that's really hard to get the hang of, and to macro manage all of your resources and knowing when to like change over from farming one type of thing in the community plaza to the next. And I feel like they're just really complex, and so many of their upgrades are just stuff that you've never seen before. Now moving on to Lakota. So Lakota have one thing that really makes them stand out compared to every other civ, and it's their lack of buildings, because Lakota don't actually need to make houses. They already have a population cap of 200 when you first load into the game, which is kind of nice because it means that you don't have to prioritize wood as much to keep that pop cap running. But they are also a civ that have some very strong units, but I feel like you have to know those units quite well to know when to use them. So I was playing Lakota the other day, I had this huge army of bow riders, and I sent them straight into some like Rodoleros, and they got eaten up alive. Next we have the Inca. Now Inca is a civ that I definitely have not played a ton of. I've played a little bit of them, and they're very good with their houses that generate food over time. You can also get this card that allows their houses to switch between generating food and wood, which makes them really good and a really good boom civ as well. And they can also make some really nice turtle bases and really good defensive bases because their houses are so big and chunky, just like me. And yet again, as I've said with most of these other civs, is they have some very unique units that are hard to get the grip of, but once you do, you're going to be having a good time with this civ. They're a very overpowered civ with some very broken units in them. Okay, now moving on to our next category, which is I hate myself for playing the civ. And at the beginning of this category, or this tier, we do have the USA. Now I feel like the USA is a civ that is probably going to take me thousands of hours to understand how to play, because every time you age up, you have to age up with the Federate state. Now, if you don't know what this means, is you age up, you get the normal perks of like resources or something when you age up, but you also get to unlock certain cards. Now these cards are obviously completely new, stuff that you have never seen before, and they're very hard to understand, and often I find myself taking like 2 minutes to read between each age, and I end up just losing the game because half the game I'm just reading. So they're definitely a civ that you want to get comfortable with before you start playing any ranked, which is something I learned the hard way. Now moving on, we have Ethiopia, which is one of the new civs. I think they're a really cool civ, and they have this livestock market, which makes them really unique to any other civ. And I think one thing that makes them even harder is, like, they have so many buildings that, like, I'm just like, what does this building do? I don't understand how to play this civ. And lots of their units are all different. I feel like they're just a difficult civ to get the hang of. I've played like 2 games with these guys. I've watched a lot more gameplay of these guys, but yeah, they're just a very weird civ. Now moving on to India. Now India are literally like one of my all-time favorite civs, but I can like barely play them. I feel like they're really fun with all their elephants and stuff. I just love making huge armies of elephants and just trampling over my enemies' armies. But with their villages costing wood, and lots of other things about them that are just unique, like they aren't able to harvest any livestock animals. The livestock animals generate XP, so they're really good for XP farming, but it's just kind of difficult to get the hang of what you want to be doing in terms of your macro management. And also in terms of your army composition, you really have to learn fast and kind of on the go what your army composition should be, because they have like 10 different unique units that you can use. You want to learn which ones are good for which situations. Now moving on to Hausa. Now Hausa are very similar to Ethiopia. I've hardly even played them. I've played like a few games of them, but I just find them kind of difficult to learn and to get the hang of. And they're also a civ that I feel like they're going to be very strong. Like if you can learn the civ well and learn how to use them well, you're going to be one of the best players out there, because not many people know how to use the civ, so it's definitely a civ worth trying to learn and trying to get good at. But it's going to take you some time to get good at, and it's going to be hard. If you've ever seen like a British player who knows exactly what their build order is and exactly what they're doing, you're going to struggle a little bit to keep up with them. Now unfortunately this tier list thing doesn't actually have like a thing for Mexico, so I'm just going to put my imaginary Mexico right here. Alright, so Mexico is definitely, I hate myself for playing this civ. Now this, I'd say, is by far the most complex civ. Like they can do these things like a revolution, and they can do these revolutions at each age. And these revolutions have different perks and unlocks whole new decks, whole new perks. So it's pretty much like you can have like 5 different decks with Mexico. Your original deck and then a deck for each age, which I think is super complex. And then like even to learn how to use one revolution is hard enough. But to learn how to use like 5 different revolutions, this is literally going to take you thousands of hours to master this civ. And they also, just like the United States, age up with Federate State age ups. So you have to learn how to use and like what ones you want to go for, because you're going to mess up big time against like a French or a British player who knows what they've been doing. They've played thousands of hours on this one civ. They know every little detail, every statistic about everything. And you're trying to learn how to do like 1,000 things just to win. So they're a lot more complex and a lot harder to use. And if you're a beginner, I definitely wouldn't suggest starting off with this civ. You definitely want to learn how to use the other civs, some of the basic Euro civs, and then go to this civ. But anyways guys, that was the video. I really hope you guys did enjoy this video. Leave your own tier list or like top 3 easiest, top 3 hardest down below. Anyways guys, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!